Hi, it's Katrina. What if our understanding of history is wrong? What if ancient civilizations were far more advanced than we ever imagined? Today, I'm going to tell you about a very controversial theory, the possibility of ancient nuclear warfare. Prepare to question everything you know about the past as we examine some mysterious cases of ancient sites that were blasted away. We'll also look at some ancient possible atomic warfare and artifacts that seem too advanced for their time. Some things just don't fit in. So take a look and then let me know if you think there was an extremely advanced civilization that got lost in the past. Ancient nuclear war. Researchers have found proof that many years ago there was an atomic war. Nuclear weapons bombarded the planet during what's being dubbed as World War Zero. Before the biblical flood, there was a mighty civilization that lived on this planet. Not just a civilization that could build pyramids and great temples, they had the same technology as we do today, and it destroyed them. So was there a nuclear event in ancient India? There are several different pieces of evidence, so let's start with something a little more legendary. In the ancient Sanskrit epic from India known as the Mahabharata, there are some very strange passages. The ancient text describes a world-ending catastrophe. A single projectile charged with all the power of the universe struck the land and created an incandescent column of smoke and fire as bright as 10,000 suns. The Mahabharata describes this weapon as an iron thunderbolt, a messenger of death that reduced an entire race to ashes. The text goes on to say that those who were in the blast radius of this great weapon were burned beyond recognition. The corpses were incinerated, leaving no trace of them behind. Those who didn't die immediately had their hair and fingernails fall out. In the aftermath, food was so infected that to eat it was to get sick. People were so desperate to escape the destruction that even if they didn't die during the blast, they flung themselves into the river. The Mahabharata was written around the 3rd century BC, long before anyone knew about atomic energy or nuclear bombs. Yet it describes precisely what happened at Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. It's just a story though, right? There are plenty of strange stories that have been written over the last few thousand years. Only this story is backed up by physical evidence in India, where the Mahabharata was written. A layer of radioactive ash was found in Rajasthan, covering an area of about 3 square miles near the city of Jodhpur. This radioactive stretch of land was discovered during the development of some housing units. Since those housing units have gone up, the people who live in them have allegedly experienced a high rate of birth defects and cancer. The government was supposedly forced to cordon off the area when investigators found radiation levels to be way beyond what any human should be exposed to. Could this be proof of an ancient atomic blast? And if so, how long ago did it happen? For these answers and more, keep watching! India isn't the only country with proof of ancient atomic weapons being unleashed. Before we begin, I want to give a big thank you to Gentle Bands for sponsoring today's video. You might have noticed that I'm wearing some bling today. Gentle Bands specializes in making rings that represent who you are. They use materials like dinosaur fossils, meteorites, retired spacecraft titanium, and all kinds of things to create a ring as unique as you are. They got me at dinosaur fossils. It's a little more on the masculine side, but I like unisex jewelry, and if I can be wearing dinosaur fossils and meteorites, then I'm all for it. You guys know I love that stuff. I chose this ring here because it has all of the things that I love. It's called the Symphony. It's made of hammered tungsten carbide with an inlay of genuine meteorite and fossilized dinosaur bone fragments. If you're like me, you might be wondering, where do they get the dinosaur fossils? They partner with museums to get dinosaur fossils from the Jurassic Age that are too small for exhibition, and then turn them into smaller fragments to use in the jewelry. If you've been watching the channel for a while, you know that meteorites also hold great significance in the ancient world. The ancient Egyptians used iron from meteorites to make ritual objects. There might be times where wearing a ring is inconvenient, so Gentle Bands also offers the chain to keep this meaningful gift or commitment close to you at all times. These rings make great personalized gifts for any occasion. Gentle Bands is giving our viewers 25% off with the code Katrina25 at checkout. They are currently offering free engraving service too, so go ahead and click on the link in the description box and remember to use the code Katrina25, that's Katrina25 at checkout. And now back to the video. The Nampa figurine. One of the most promising artifacts to confirm an ancient human civilization lived on Earth was discovered in the small town of Nampa, Idaho. It's not the kind of place you expect the world to change, but this artifact is going to make your jaw drop. In 1889, a small group of workers were looking for water near Nampa. They chose a promising location and got to work digging a well. They drilled a borehole about 295 feet deep. Then, using a steam pump, they started to suck out debris. As little bits of clay were spat from the hose, one of the bits caught the eye of the workers. It was a small piece of clay fashioned into the likeness of a woman. Upon closer inspection, it became clear they were dealing with a tiny statuette. The figure was really small, hardly larger than the biggest coin in your piggy bank, but its shape was irrefutably human. It had a little circular head, a skinny abdomen, 2 obvious arms, a pair of legs, and divots in its head that could have once been facial features. What's so special about it? Surely ancient Native Americans left clay figurines all over the place. True, but they didn't leave them 295 feet deep. The workers in Nampa had drilled through a geological stratum known as the Glens Ferry Formation. This formation was created 2 million years ago. The figurine had been locked inside of the clay formation, meaning it couldn't have come from Native Americans. It couldn't have come from any known civilization. In 1975, the whole area was designated a U.S. National Natural Landmark. Now it is called the Hagerman Fossil Beds National Monument, a place rich in plant and animal fossils. The creatures embedded in the clay here were alive before North America fell into an ice age. It's one of the only places where fossils of the American zebra have been found. Sadly, there's no time today for zebras. That's a discussion for another time. The initial feeling after the Nampa figurine was discovered was that it was legitimate. Geologist George Frederick Wright from the Boston Society of Natural History put his full support behind the artifact. He even visited Nampa in 1890 to look at the debris that had been sucked up out of the well. George also spoke with the parties who had made the discovery. He looked at all the evidence, looked into the eyes of the people involved, and proclaimed the figurine a genuine artifact. Even still, that doesn't explain how it exists. The Nampa figurine defies the accepted timeline of human history and evolution. As far as scientists are concerned, no creature alive on this planet 2 million years ago could have carved a complex human figure. Make no mistake, the Nampa figurine is complex. In 1979, Professor Albert A. Wright of Oberlin College described it as the creation of a true artist. Even though the figurine has been badly battered by the passing of time, its appearance is distinct. Albert said there are even faint geometric markings on the figure which could represent clothing or jewelry. The shoulders are broad, the mouth is just barely discernible, and the legs are long and thin. Experts think the figurine is of a woman. So, what do you think about all this? Let me know in the comments. And now for number 10. But first, it's shout-out time. I want to give a big thank you to Mike Duckwall and William Garcia for supporting this channel. We wouldn't be here without you guys. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like these. The Japanese Atlantis. Just off the coast of Japan's Ryukyu Islands, some pyramid structures have caught the attention of researchers since the 80s. This mysterious underwater city has been called the Atlantis of Japan. In 1986, local Japanese diver Kihachiro Aratake stumbled upon the discovery of a lifetime. He was out looking for hammerhead sharks when he noticed some strange formations in the seabed. About 75 feet down, the diver realized he was swimming next to perfectly straight edges. Not just edges, but steps. He was swimming down the perfectly formed staircase of a sunken monument. Since the news broke, it has remained one of the biggest unsolved mysteries of our time. The rectangular monument could be all that remains of an ancient civilization. The geometric shapes with terraces and straight edges do not look natural. But it might not be a city at all. The Japanese Agency for Cultural Affairs has not recognized it as anything important. In 2019, a team of geologists went to investigate to try to settle the debate once and for all. The scientists concluded that these features are a result of natural weathering and erosion caused by strong currents in the ocean. There is no clear evidence of worked stone or any artifacts found around the monument. But others, such as author and pseudoscientist Graham Hancock, said it best when he said the concentration of so many peculiar formations in one area is highly unlikely. He doesn't believe what the other scientists are saying. Marine geologist Masaki Kimura is with Graham Hancock on this one. He claimed the formations are monoliths made by a human civilization at least 10,000 years ago. The monument would have been above water at one time, perhaps part of the mythical lost continent of Nu. Masaki has pointed out castles, roads, a pyramid, and even a stadium, all of which were part of Japan's own Atlantis. What happened to it is another matter entirely. So what do you think? Natural formation or lost city? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Were the Egyptians in the Americas? This is a very big historical question, so stay focused. How did ancient Egyptians get their hands on nicotine and cocaine? No, this isn't an episode of Cops. This is archaeology, and the experts are stumped. In 1992, renowned forensic toxicologist Dr. Svetla Balabanova discovered the impossible. While she was examining an elite mummy, she found traces of 3 substances: hashish, nicotine, and cocaine. This mummy was a party animal. The mummy belonged to a woman named Lady Henut Taui. She lived 3,000 years ago at a time when the tobacco and coca plants only grew in the Americas. There was no way for the Egyptian noblewomen to procure these substances. After the discovery was announced, the scientific community exploded. People accused Dr. Balabanova of having contaminated samples. They said no way did an Egyptian mummy have trace elements of these 3 substances in her hair. There has been nothing but confusion surrounding Lady Henut Taui over the past 30 years. Some believe the discovery was authentic and that the Egyptians did have access to tobacco. It's possible they traveled to the Americas thousands of years before Christopher Columbus and brought back tobacco plants. For some, this evidence points to a global trading network that connected dozens of civilizations across the globe. Maybe the world used to be linked in a way that modern scientists can't even imagine. The Sapata fossil footprint. Who left this footprint here? There is a human footprint in the wilderness of New Mexico that doesn't make any logical sense. It's embedded in a piece of limestone 250 million years old. How do you explain that one? The footprint was initially discovered by a hunter. The hunter told his friend Don Shockey about the fossilized footprint. Don, having a bit of background in anthropology, became very interested. Don put together a small team of researchers, which included Drs. Don Patton and Carl Bow. They obtained a permit to excavate near where the footprint was found. They returned to the site, photographed the imprint, took some rock samples, cast impressions, and were getting ready to excavate. Then a maniac showed up with a gun. Apparently, a local landowner thought they were on his property. Even after they showed him the excavation permit from the Bureau of Land Management, the landowner insisted they leave. He insisted down the barrel of a shotgun, so it was pretty convincing. The team was never able to get back to that rock to investigate the footprint further, but they did come away with plenty of photographs of their expedition, which act as proof that all of this happened. According to the hunter who initially found the footprint, he had seen others in the area. But who left the track 250 million years ago? Was it a primitive ancestor of Homo sapiens? Or was it a member of a forgotten tribe who ran alongside dinosaurs in their bare feet? Maybe it wasn't human at all. Ancient nuclear war in Pakistan. The Indus Valley Civilization appeared in Pakistan and India around 5,500 years ago. Thousands of years later, around 1500 BC, their culture was destroyed by atomic weapons. Archaeologists have found physical proof that the Indus Valley's key cities were annihilated by something of unimaginable power. Forget ancient Egypt, forget Mesopotamia. The Indus Valley is the true mystery of the old world, and scientists know almost nothing about them. But that's not the Indus Valley's fault. They did leave texts behind, undoubtedly containing the secrets of their beliefs, their origins, and their downfall. However, researchers have never been able to decipher their writing system. Scientists can read Egyptian hieroglyphics, they can read cuneiform, but no one can figure out how to read the Indus script. What you might find most shocking of all is that when the Indus Valley was first discovered in 1829, Egyptian hieroglyphics had already been deciphered. 10 years later, cuneiform was translated by scholar George Smith. Almost a century later, and archaeologists are still stumped. They can't read the writing, and they can't make sense of what happened in this part of the world. Let's focus on what archaeologists do know. They know the civilization likely had about 5 million people in it, their territory stretching over 900 miles. Although the two main cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro are located in Pakistan, their empire reached all the way to Nepal, Afghanistan, and the city of Delhi in India. What could have brought down such a huge and powerful culture? In the early 20th century, scholars guess they were invaded by a group of Iranian Persians known as the Aryans, but that turned out to be wrong. The Indus Valley may have fallen after an atomic assault. Proof of an atomic bombardment comes from Mohenjo-daro. The ancient city was founded around 2500 BC and discovered by archaeologists in the 1920s. When scientists excavating the city reached road level, they began to find skeletons. I hope you have goosebumps because what I'm about to tell you is chilling to say the least. Spread throughout the ancient city were skeletons of people who looked as if they had been killed abruptly. Their skeletons were lying about, unburied, and right in the middle of the street. At first, archaeologists figured they were looking at a massacre from wartime. Perhaps there was an invasion, and the skeletons were people who got caught in the crossfire, so to speak. But when scientists analyzed the skeletons, they found their hypothesis was wrong. The skeletons didn't show evidence of physical violence. It was as if they had stepped out into the street only to be instantly incinerated. One more thing. They were radioactive. A Soviet scientist allegedly found a skeleton 50 times more radioactive than normal. The bones found in Harappa and Mohenjo-daro have the same level of radioactivity as the bodies of people who died at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. An English researcher named David Davenport was the first one to recognize an impact epicenter. In the city of Mohenjo-daro, David identified a pit where it looks like something big exploded. David found that near the pit, within what seems to be a blast radius, there was epic heat. He discovered stones turned to glass and rocks melted by what must have been temperatures of over 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit. Could this be what destroyed the Indus Valley civilization? Was an atomic bomb dropped on them 4,000 years ago? If so, who dropped it? What do you think about this theory? Let me know in the comments. The flying machines of ancient India. In the same ancient Indian texts where you find stories of atomic bombs being unleashed on the world, there are also stories of flying machines. In fact, flying machines are mentioned so frequently in ancient Hindu texts that some experts think there might be some truth to the tales. These flying machines are called vimanas. They are always described either as flying chariots or flying palaces. As for who flew inside these magic vehicles, that would be the gods. Who else? In the Edicts of Ashoka and the Vedas teachings and in Jainist texts, Hindu gods travel vast distances using their flying machines. Sometimes they fly to the moon. Sometimes they go to space. Other times they use their vimanas more like all-terrain vehicles, either taking them over land or across the sea. But just how reliable are these texts? The Vedas, which mention vimanas a lot, are some of the oldest Indian manuscripts there are. In these old and dusty pages, you can find vimanas of all shapes and sizes. In the Yantra Sarvasva, a sage by the name of Maharshi Bharadwaj separates vimanas into 3 classifications based on range. Some were able to travel locally, like small single-engine airplanes. Others could travel to different countries and different continents, like big passenger jets. The third classifications were flying machines that took the gods to different planets. Vimanas could be invisible. They could spread destruction like a plague. They were sometimes described as being cigar-shaped, and other times they were circular, like flying discs. In Hindu myth, humans have been around for a lot longer than mainstream scientists say. The Empire of Rama existed 15,000 years ago, about the time Atlantis was supposedly somewhere in the Atlantic. The Empire of Rama had 7 great cities where the primary modes of transportation was flying machines. In the ancient texts that talk about the Empire of Rama, there are specific details about the ships, with some even having flying manuals in them. The manuals go into incredible detail for how to pilot and fuel the flying craft. Unfortunately, there is no evidence for vimanas being real outside of ancient writing. Nobody has ever found one. But just because it hasn't been dug out of the ground doesn't mean it didn't exist, right? The amazing engineering of the Devil's Tower. If you've ever seen Devil's Tower in Wyoming before, you've most likely taken a few pictures. marveled at the natural formations, and then went about your business. 500,000 visitors behold the vertical Tower of Stone every single year. What not many of them know is that the tower was formed by a global flood. In 1906, President Theodore Roosevelt established Devil's Tower as the very first national monument in the United States of America. And for good reason. The massive cone-shaped tower is 867 feet tall, though it looms 1,267 feet above the nearby river. Geologists can't quite figure out how the tower was made, only that it happened about 50 million years ago. Early scientists thought the tower was the core of an ancient volcano. Others thought it was a remnant of magma that had been discharged from below ground and solidified into a kind of mushroom shape. Then there is what the creationist Christians are saying. They believe that Devil's Tower stands as a testament to the truth of the biblical flood. They also don't think it's 50 million years old. They've estimated it as closer to 4,500 years old. The creationists believe the tower is all that remains of an ancient landscape washed away by Noah's flood. Whose skull is this? The Calavera skull is alleged proof of the oldest known human being in the world. After its discovery in 1866, the scientific community was shocked. The skull was presented as evidence that humans lived in North America 2 million years ago. It all started on a cold February morning. A group of miners in Calaveras County, California said that they discovered a human skull in a mine underneath 130 feet of lava. The skull was taken from the mine and placed in the hands of Josiah Whitney, who was the state geologist for California. He was also a professor at Harvard University. Full disclosure though, Josiah was considered a nutcase by his peers. The year before the skull came into his possession, Josiah had published an article suggesting humans and woolly mammoths coexisted. They did, but nobody knew it for sure in 1866. Josiah was called a crazy person. When he got the skull, it was the proof he needed to sway the non-believers. He announced its discovery at a meeting of the California Academy of Sciences in July. He claimed the skull came from the oldest known man ever. From the very beginning, other scientists were dubious. In 1869, the San Francisco Evening Bulletin ran a story in which the miner who found the skull admitted it was a practical joke. Harvard scientist Thomas Wilson did a fluorine analysis on the skull in 1879. It was the first time something like this was done on a human bone. The analysis revealed that the skull was recent, no more than a few decades old. Josiah Whitney never floundered in his belief, and others rallied to help him. Professor Frederick Ward Putnam, also from Harvard, believed the skull was everything Josiah said it was. But no matter how many people were on his side, Josiah couldn't catch a break. Around 1900, anthropologist William Henry Holmes from the Smithsonian Institution investigated the skull. He determined that the plant and animal fossils found near it were genuine. However, the skull itself was too modern. William said there was no way human beings remained unchanged for 2 million years. He believed the skull was most likely a hoax. Then, in 1992, scientists used radiocarbon dating to establish the age of the skull at less than 1,000 years old. So, is that the end of the story? There was no ancient man at all? Stories like this never end so easily. The skull that was tested by all of these scientists may not have been the original. Josiah had supposedly lost the original specimen. He was carrying around a random skull instead of the one he found beneath the lava. There is still nothing definitive that can be said for the Calavera skull. If it was a practical joke played on Josiah, it went on for a very long time. The Nimrud Lens. The Nimrud Lens is an artifact you can see with your own eyes at the British Museum in London. But just because you're looking at it doesn't mean you'll know what it is. Scientists have been arguing over this ancient relic for years. Although they call it a lens, it might in reality be a piece of crystal technology. Let's start at the beginning. In 1850, British archaeologist Austin Henry Layard was excavating Nimrud, an ancient Assyrian palace in Iraq. During excavations, Austin noticed a tiny piece of rock crystal lying in the debris. Naturally, he picked it up and took it with him. The piece of crystal is roughly oval and a bit thicker than your average eyeglass lens. It boasts a focal point equivalent to a 3 times magnifying glass. Whoever created this piece of crystal had given it magnifying properties on purpose. But why? There are all kinds of guesses. Some think it was a tool used to start fires by concentrating sunlight into a death beam. Austin himself thought it was a tool for reading small inscriptions. Have you ever wondered how ancient civilizations knew so much about the stars? They knew all the constellations, they knew planets, they were able to predict celestial events, yet they didn't have access to technology. Or did they? Italian scientist Giovanni Pettinato suggested the Assyrian Empire did indeed have access to technology. He said the Nimrud Lens may have been part of a sophisticated telescope. This could explain how Mesopotamians knew so much about astronomy. If true, Giovanni's hypothesis would change history. The Nimrud Lens was made in the 8th century BC, roughly 2,400 years before the first official telescope was created in the Netherlands in 1608. Could humans have had telescopic technology and then lost it? I wouldn't say it's impossible, and the Nimrud Lens is a legitimate piece of crystal. It could have easily been incorporated into a telescope. It's just too bad that somebody can't go back in time and ask the Assyrians. Sodom and Gomorrah. According to the Bible, the ancient cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were annihilated by God. According to the archaeological evidence, they were actually destroyed by nuclear warheads. Well, maybe not exactly, but something very similar. It seems an ancient war with atomic weapons affected more than just the region of India and Pakistan. At the ruined city of Tal el-Hammam, archaeologists found a substance called trinitite. You may have heard of it before. It's a certain type of glass that you can only find in the desert when an atomic bomb has gone off and melted the sand. In the book of Genesis, it said that God rained down burning sulfur on the city of Sodom. Nobody has ever been able to pinpoint where exactly Sodom was in the real world. It was likely a real place, but its precise location has been lost. Or rather, it was lost. Dr. John Bergsma from Ohio's Franciscan University thinks Sodom was Tal el-Hammam. 3,600 years ago, Tal el-Hammam was a thriving city on par with Sodom, or at least its description in the Bible. Tal el-Hammam was bigger and more powerful than Jerusalem, and it was more important than Jericho. It was also blown to smithereens. The city suddenly got wiped off the map, and archaeologists have been trying to figure out why for years. There is no evidence of a military siege. Nowhere in the historical records does it mention conflict. If the city truly is Sodom, and if the Bible is to be believed, the city was destroyed by a cataclysm within seconds. Now, Dr. John Bergsma has proof of that cataclysm. John and his scientific team identified skeletons that had been exposed to extreme heat. The skeletons they found are kind of disturbing. Some of them were completely normal from their feet to their backbone, but then there was a scorch mark at the hips. The rest of them gone, as if their torsos had been incinerated instantaneously. The evidence at the site suggests the city was hit by an epic blast. Experts found shattered bits of pottery sprinkled in trinitite. Archaeologist Stephen Collins suggested that whatever exploded at Tal el-Hammam did so with more energy than the atomic bomb at Hiroshima. I should note that most archaeologists and historians don't think it was a literal bomb that blew up Sodom and its neighboring city of Gomorrah. They believe it was an asteroid that exploded in the atmosphere. The world's first cipher. The cryptex is a device used to store secrets. It's a large cylinder that operates a little like a combination lock. The only way to open a cryptex is to correctly align a sequence of letters and symbols along the rings of the cylinder. You can't just try all the combinations though, because too many incorrect combos break the machine. Then the secrets inside are lost forever. Unfortunately though, the cryptex isn't a real thing. It was made up by Dan Brown, author of the Da Vinci Code. Even though his invention isn't real, ancient cryptic devices did exist, like the Caesar cipher. The Caesar cipher was named after Julius Caesar, as you may have guessed, but he didn't invent the cipher. Nobody knows who did. Caesar just so happens to be the first known person to have used the cipher for secret communication. If there was a message Julius Caesar needed to get to an ally but couldn't have somebody secretly read, he wrote it in cipher. He did this by changing the order of letters in the alphabet so that none of the words could be understood. The only way to know what Julius Caesar was saying was by having access to the secret code. The Caesar cipher is so useful that it was used as late as 1915 by the Russian army. They did have access to more complicated codes, but members of the military had a difficult time understanding how to crack them. So the top brass had to resort to using the ancient technique just so their soldiers didn't get confused. It wasn't a great method considering that German and Austrian analysts were able to decipher the messages pretty much instantly. What other sorts of secret Enigma machines do you think have been lost over the ages? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching! Don't forget to subscribe and come back soon for more videos from the channel.
Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed.
Iram of the Pillars. The Quran makes several mentions of an ancient city or a region called Iram of the Pillars. Roman and Nabatean traders reportedly recognized it for its vast wealth and its lofty buildings. Some believe that Iram was the home of a mighty tribe called the Ad. The Quran says they came right after the time of Noah and built monuments on elevated places. The city sometimes went by the name of Ubar and may have functioned as the capital of the kingdom of Ad. According to the Quran, a catastrophic wind blew through the region for 7 days straight and buried Iram in the sand, leaving no trace of it visible to the naked eye. What's left of it, if anything, is thought to be somewhere on the Arabian Peninsula. Nobody has ever found evidence of Iram being a real place, leading some experts to believe that Iram might have been a myth, the product of folklore that's been handed down through the generations. But even if this is the case, the stories may be rooted in a real place. Many people have searched for Iram, but it remains shrouded in mystery to this day. T.E. Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia, described the elusive ancient city as the Atlantis of the Sands. In other words, even if Iram actually existed, it continues to hide from everyone, but there are some desperately trying to find it. Greenland Vikings. Eric the Red was a Viking who was exiled from Iceland in 982 for committing a murder. He led a fleet of 25 boats to Greenland, where the settlers established 2 communities. The first one, known as the Eastern Settlement, was situated near the island's southwestern coast. The other village, you guessed it, the Western Settlement, was located roughly 404 miles to the north along Greenland's western coast. There were initially around 500 settlers consisting mostly of wealthy farmers and chieftains who established farmsteads and built Christian churches. They fished, hunted wild caribou and seals, and kept livestock including cattle, sheep, and goats. The Eastern Settlement grew to include around 500 farms, while the Western Settlement had just 100. At its peak, the colony's population numbered around 5,000 people. When Norwegian missionary Hans Egede arrived in Greenland in 1721, he found the settlements in ruins, and the residents had vanished. Researchers don't know what happened to these communities. They think it may have something to do with a mini ice age during the 13th century that was triggered by a massive volcanic eruption in Indonesia. Evidence shows that around that time, Norse Greenlanders switched to a diet that consisted mainly of marine animals. This indicates that their livestock may have died off during the sudden cold spell. Many experts argue that climate change alone cannot explain the Greenland Vikings' disappearance. Instead, they blame a combination of factors, including the possibility that some residents return to Europe. But the plain and simple truth is that our understanding of the circumstances is unclear. The Vinka Civilization. The Neolithic Vinka Civilization, also called the Danube Valley Civilization, originated as early as 7000 BC. It grew to occupy a vast swath of southeastern Europe, including parts of modern-day Serbia, Kosovo, Bulgaria, Romania, and Macedonia. The Vinka culture is widely considered the cradle of European civilization. Its people built some of the largest prehistoric settlements in the region, fueled a population boom, and played a major role in advancing farming after it was introduced to the area. The Vinka developed a plow for sowing their crops and began using copper eating utensils at least 1,000 years before they became common in Europe. They were not culturally unified, but maintained solidarity by trading all kinds of ritual objects and goods over a vast network of settlements. Zoomorphic and anthropomorphic figures were defining aspects of the Vinka culture. The civilization used around 700 symbols, which some scholars classify as one of the earliest forms of writing. Evidence indicates that some Vinka settlements were occupied for at least 1,000 years before they were abandoned for unknown reasons. The Mississippians. Between 800 and 1600 AD, a Native American civilization called the Mississippians thrived throughout much of the United States. They built a trade network of loosely connected urban villages and satellite settlements, many of which contained large earthen platform mounds. The architecture varied by region, but the settlements were tied to a common culture and belief system centered around ritual game playing. As far as experts know, the Mississippians did not have any stone architecture or a writing system. The culture originated in the Mississippi River Valley. Its largest city and religious center, Cahokia, was located in what is now southern Illinois. The extensive Mississippian trade network stretched as far west as the Rocky Mountains, east to the Atlantic Ocean, north to the Great Lakes, and south to the Gulf of Mexico. Mississippians differed from other Native American societies in numerous ways. They intensively farmed maize and had a complex chiefdom and social structure, which led to a level of inequality that was seemingly absent from other Native American cultures. The civilization peaked between 1200 and 1400, at which point it began to decline. Warfare and political turmoil increased, prompting many of Cahokia's residents to leave. By 1500, most factions of the Mississippian culture had dispersed or were in severe distress. Very few settlements were still around when Native Americans and Europeans came into contact for the first time. Several modern indigenous groups are thought to descend from the Mississippians, including the Alabama, Appalachee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Osage, and Seminole, just to name a few. The Axum. The Axumite Empire was an African kingdom that spanned modern-day Eritrea and northern Ethiopia, as well as parts of Djibouti, Somalia, and Somaliland. It rose to power around 80 AD and met its mysterious downfall in 825 AD. The Kingdom of Axum was a major player along a commercial trade route between the Roman Empire and ancient India. It used its far-reaching power to influence politics and societies as far away as the Arabian Peninsula across the Red Sea. Axum was also the first sub-Saharan empire to mint its own coins and adopt Christianity. During the early 7th century, the Axumites stopped making new currency. Around the same time, residents were forced to flee inland, where they sought refuge on higher ground from some sort of upheaval. The capital was abandoned and resettled at an unknown location. The Axumite Empire is one of the least documented civilizations. Historians know little about it, and the reasons for its collapse are a mystery. One theory suggests that the Axumites became economically isolated as other civilizations came to dominate the Red Sea, and that this triggered their downfall. According to legend, a Jewish queen named Judith, or Judith, ordered the burning of Axum's Christian churches around 960, but many historians question whether this story is true or if Judith even existed to begin with. Another story claims that a pagan queen from a rival tribe was responsible for ending the Axumites' power. Climate may have also been a factor. During the 1st century, it rained more than usual, increasing the region's food supply. But there was a huge population to support, and it's possible that the land could no longer handle the intense farming that was required to keep people fed. Nineveh. Nineveh was an ancient Assyrian city situated on the outskirts of Mosul in what is now Iraq. It was settled as early as 6000 BC during the late Neolithic period. By 3000 BC, Nineveh had become a major religious center dedicated to the Mesopotamian goddess Ishtar. The walled city was built along a fault line and experienced numerous earthquakes, including one that destroyed its temple to Ishtar. Despite these occasional setbacks, Nineveh became a major learning center and functioned as the capital of the Assyrian Empire for much of its existence. It grew to include parks, aqueducts, canals, an 80-room palace, and a library that housed 30,000 clay tablets. People lived there continuously for thousands of years. In the 50 years leading up to 612 BC, Nineveh was the world's largest city. That year, a coalition of allied forces sacked and razed Nineveh. The intruders massacred many of the city's residents and deported others to the countryside. Nineveh never recovered from the destruction, but it wasn't fully abandoned. In the centuries following the attack, the city fell under the rule of various civilizations, including the Seleucid Empire, the Parthian Empire, the Sasanian Empire, and finally the Arabs. By the 13th century, Nineveh was reduced mostly to ruins. Today, the site consists of 2 large mounds and the remains of the city's massive stone and mud brick wall that was built around 700 BC. Sadly, what's left of Nineveh is losing its battle to the elements, looters, and the Islamic State terrorist group, which threatened to eliminate or destroy any remaining evidence of its long and rich history. Cucuteni Tripilians. The Neolithic Cucuteni Tripilian culture rose to prominence around 5500 BC. Its people settled across parts of what is now Eastern Europe, including modern-day Russia, Moldova, and Ukraine. Between 4000 BC and 3500 BC, the Cucuteni Tripilians built Neolithic Europe's largest settlements, with populations numbering between 20,000 and 46,000 people. The civilization burned its settlements down every 60 to 80 years and often built new structures at the same sites. For example, the Pădure site in Romania contains 13 layers of remains from settlements that were destroyed and buried by new buildings. Researchers have no clue why the Cucuteni Tripilians did this, but it limited the amount of artifacts they left behind. The civilization also left no signs of a written language. As a result, experts have very little to learn about them. The few artifacts that were found intact include clay totems, copper tools, and spiritual objects. Cucuteni Tripilian settlements were first discovered during the late 19th century. Recent findings reveal that the obscure culture played a bigger role in human advancement than it's given credit for. But because of their habit of destroying the evidence, we'll probably never know the true extent of their knowledge and capabilities. Can you imagine burning your house down every 60 years and having to rebuild it? Let me know in the comments below. Kerma. The Kerma culture was one of Africa's earliest civilizations. It established its self-named capital city at least 5,500 years ago in what is now Sudan. Kerma is one of the largest archaeological sites in ancient Nubia, a sub-Saharan region that was known for its gold deposits, incense, ivory, and other luxury products. By 1700 BC, the city was home to at least 10,000 residents. At its peak, it was the most powerful urban center in the region. The city had a royal audience hall, a palace, a mud brick temple, funerary temples, and chapels. Pottery and other items left behind by the Kerma are culturally distinct from the artifacts of neighboring kingdoms, including ancient Egypt. What's more, Kerman artifacts have been found over 200 miles from Kerma, reflecting the society's far-reaching ties with other groups. But the 30,000 graves at Kerma's cemetery show that the civilization was not completely free of influence from outsiders. The Kermans surrounded large graves with smaller burials, showing that they had a social hierarchy that may have been inspired by Egypt's societal structure. Some of their royal burials contain images of the god Horus and other Egyptian deities, as well as Egyptian pottery, amulets, and scarab seals. Egypt and Kerma clearly traded both material goods and cultural ideas, but their relationship soured at some point, and the Egyptians sacked the city around 1500 BC. Kerma went on to serve as the headquarters for several of the new kingdom's rulers. Etruscans. Italy's Tuscany region was once known as Etruscania, and it was home to one of the most advanced ancient societies to develop outside of ancient Greece. The earliest known evidence of the Etruscan civilization dates back to around 900 BC, and the oldest examples of their writing originated around 700 BC. But their texts did not survive into modern times, leaving scholars to rely solely on Greek and Roman sources. As a result, even the best experts can only partially understand the Etruscan language. There are numerous problems that come with trying to learn about the Etruscans based on what people from other cultures wrote about them. For example, archaeological evidence suggests that the Etruscans were indigenous to Eretria, but the Greeks wrote that the Etruscans descended from the indigenous Pelasgian population of Greece. The Greeks may have seen the Etruscans and the Pelasgians trading with each other, and the two societies may have had some similar traditions and customs, but any shared aspects of their lifestyles likely resulted from cultural exchange rather than migration, according to expert Dominique Briquel. The Etruscans began assimilating into Roman society during the 4th century BC, after losing a series of conflicts known as the Roman-Etruscan Wars. They were granted Roman citizenship around 90 BC, and in the following decades, their territory was incorporated into the Roman Empire. Much of the Etruscan culture was likely lost throughout this transition, and even DNA studies have failed to determine exactly where the civilization came from. The Giraff culture. During the 3rd millennium BC, in what is now Iran's Halil River Valley, an early Bronze Age civilization called the Giraff culture emerged. The obscure culture's sprawling urban settlement was surrounded by rugged mountains on 3 sides and consisted of 2 large burial mounds, a fortified citadel, and numerous smaller buildings. The Giraff people had a sophisticated lifestyle and a complex social hierarchy for their time. They practiced religion and crafted fine goods like vases and statues. After peaking sometime between 2500 and 2200 BC, the civilization abandoned its settlements for unknown reasons. Their deserted villages were buried and forgotten. The sites were rediscovered during the early 20th century. They were excavated several times, but also fell victim to looters, leaving few artifacts for experts to learn from. Consequently, modern scholars know very little about the Giraff culture. It's clear that the people were a distinct group with their own architecture, language, beliefs, and a writing system that consisted of geometric figures. Some researchers believe that the society may very well be one of the cradles of civilization, one of the first places in the world where complex urban centers grew. It's even possible that the Giraff culture was once as great as the Sumerians or ancient Mesopotamia. Unfortunately, most of what they left behind has been lost to history. Thanks for watching! Which ancient civilization is your favorite? Let me know in the comments below. And if you'd like to learn about more mysterious lost civilizations, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more. See you soon! Bye!